Well, it is 11:30 a.m. on the East Coast, and I appreciate all that have joined us today for this webinar. It's an opportunity for portable church industries to help think through some solutions that we have come to understand. There's a lot of churches that are growing. God's church is on the move and taking ground, and we are excited about that. And we want to be helpful. And as I was talking with Rich Birch about that, he had brought up a couple of ideas. So rather than just share his ideas, I'm sharing Rich today, which is even better. He is an exciting guy that has his heart in the right place with regard to the church, church leaders, and helping the church grow. So we are glad that Rich is on with us today. We have a couple of other friends with us. Barrett Weimer is with us from Portable Church, and he is a launch specialist. Nobody in the world that is better at helping churches who want to go portable to land in their portable experience professionally and with the utmost care and effectiveness. So I brought Barrett on again because he's the best. And then we've got a couple of other people behind the scenes, Jeremiah Williams and Jesse Reed, who are operating the controls. And you will see that the chat room is live. And if you have any questions, you'll want to put them in the chat room. And also, just a note, we are recording this for future purposes. And if you'd like to not be seen on those future recordings, you'll want to turn off the video. Otherwise, you're going to be with us for months to come. But we hope you enjoy the opportunity. So today we're taking on what we had hoped to do was to have you say, what? Launching a new campus in 150 days? What are you talking about? Yeah, that's where we want to take you because PCI, this is what we do all the time. This is an easy time frame for us, but we want to help the church have a wonderful runway. If you are in a position where you have plateaued past that 80% mark in your 1, 2, or 3, or 4 services, and you're not quite sure what solutions are available, we want to help you with some of that. So we'll give you something to think about. We will offer free consultation on the phone afterwards. We can talk with you, and we'll make Rich's information available to you so you can consult with him as well. But this is launch a new location for your church in less than 150 days. Yes, we did say that. 150 days, and it's going to be exciting. So one of the first things that we want to do is, as we were talking to Rich about what we were doing, he confirmed his own observations that there are parts of the church that are just exploding, some churches that are doing really well and probably need some help with some solution ideas. And so I'm going to open it up to Rich with the 5 telltale signs that your church is ready to launch your first or your next location. Rich, that is intriguing enough to have its own webinar, but I'm going to give it to you and have you entreat us with some good wisdom.
That's great. So glad to be here. Appreciate that, Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity. For folks that don't know, that if we haven't had a chance to connect before, first of all, I think it's great you're investing time today thinking about these issues. And I know you're here because you are, excited to see your church reach more people. For folks that if we haven't had a chance to meet, it's great and honor to get a chance to connect. A bit about my background, was an executive pastor at 3 fairly fast-growing churches. 2 of the 3 went from less than 1,000 to 3, 4, 5,000 people. Multi-site, particularly, I've got a huge passion in this area. Was in the driver's seat through those experience of 13 launches directly, which I don't know, like somebody else might have done more, but I don't know who. I haven't met them yet.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
on this side, so been in, the driver's seat of a bunch of those and have coached a bunch more over the years. If through that experience, we ended up recruiting, or I ended up, leading systems to recruit 1,500 volunteers. And those campuses today are, at last check, with over 9,000 people in attendance in those 13 locations. A podcaster, author, husband, dad, coach. I a number of years ago pivoted into helping churches full time, and I volunteer at my church now. So one of the churches I was an executive pastor at, I'm back volunteering this weekend. I'm ushering at the church, standing at the door, welcoming people, which is a real honor. I want to tell you a story about launching. So when I was at a church in the Toronto area, we set a goal of launching every year. We said we're going to, for the next 5 years, and this is in the early 2000s, actually, before it was even called multi-site. Like, we didn't even know what it was called. We were just doing this thing. And we said, we really had a crazy idea, which is we're going to do one of these a year for every 5 years, or for the next 5 years. And which was crazy. We knew nothing. And you know a lot more about multi-site. Even if you've never launched before, you know a lot more about it than we knew at the time. Like, there's way more information, resources, help out there. I remember my first call actually to Portable Church, guy Kevin Jones, who used to work there, who doesn't have anymore. I remember calling up Kevin and explaining to him what we're doing. I said, yeah, we've got this one location and we want to like take video at this other location. And he was like, really? Tell me about that. That's fascinating. Like, it was very early days, but we got into launching. And what was interesting was every year, because we'd committed to do one of these every year. And we usually launched in the fall, or all of our launches were in the fall, which is great. This is what got me thinking about this. And so we would launch, and then, we get through Christmas, and then January, February, without doubt, there would be this conversation internally where we would say, oh, I think this is the year we shouldn't launch. I think this is the year we should pull back and not do that. And, and then we would talk about it for 6 or 8 weeks, and then we would decide, no, yeah, you're right. We're going to do it. We're going to go ahead and do that. And it got to the point where I used to joke internally that the first step in our launch process was talking about the fact that this was the year we weren't going to launch, that this was the year we were like, we're not going to, we have to have that conversation first. So if you're here today and you're thinking, I don't know, then I would say, great, you're in good shoes. You've already had that part of the conversation. Let's move on to why you should launch. And let's talk through these quickly, and then we can throw it open for Q&A.
But
So first of
actually,
all, go
Rich,
ahead.
I
Yeah.
was going to mention that that's actually a healthy, good first step.
Yeah. Oh,
It
absolutely.
makes you rethink a lot of good things.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it isn't, and I'll kind of come full circle to that at the end. You'll see that if you're hesitant, that's okay. Like, that's a part of it. Like, that is,
Yeah.
I never felt like, we never got, in all of the 13 launches I did directly, or the churches that I coached, there's a tension to be managed where, sure, we talk about nail it before you scale it. There's a certain amount of, like, we want to have stuff together, but you'll never be 100% ready. You'll never be like, okay, we've got everything sorted out. And it does take a faith step. So let's talk through these 5 reasons and see if they resonate with you. And then we can throw it open for Q&A. And, Barrett and Jeff, you guys can, redirect me after we kind of roll through, or as we go through these. So the first is, the need is great. We know Matthew 9:37, the harvest is plentiful. This passage is still so true today. I was talking to our lead pastor recently about this, and I really do think that we are in one of the greatest moments of spiritual opportunity in our country. I really believe that. I think people are more open now than they have ever been. I think and I could get super passionate about this, talk a lot about this, but we see all kinds of evidence of this rolling out at churches across the country. I talked to a leader last week who said, we baptized more people in the first 3 months of this year than we did in our largest year of baptisms ever. So, like, in the first, quarter of this year, they already baptized more people than their an entire year, their biggest year ever. And I keep hearing these kinds of things. I think we're coming out the back end. We're not going to mention COVID here, but, coming out the back end of all of that kind of impact on our culture, people look around and see, a fractious, culture around us, and they're looking for hope. They're looking for something to make a difference. They're looking for a way to connect. They're looking for relationships, and your church can offer those things. I talk to churches all the time. Jeff and Barrett and I were at an event yesterday. I get to see them
Yeah.
twice in 1 week, which is nice. And, was talking with the church that was wrestling through the third 3-service, 4-service thing, thinking about they got 3-service or thinking about the fourth. We're going to talk about that in a bit. And that's because so many people are showing up. And so I start here because I think, to be honest, and this is why I'm a bad person to ask, should you launch? I think you should, because the communities around you need a church like yours. The fact that you're just showing up to this tells me you're a kind of church that wants to make a difference. You want to reach people. And man, I think the harvest is plentiful. So next, why, now? Quicker, lighter footprint. So, obviously we're talking with Portable Church. We love those guys. They've helped a lot of churches, thousands of churches, figure out how to do this. But, so I was thinking about the portability aspect, particularly this idea of like, maybe God's leading your church to launch at the end of this year, or maybe early, next year. And the advantage of being portable is it's quicker and lighter. You can make a decision to get into to get into a school, a hotel, a bowling alley. You can make those decisions now in May, June. You can get on the phone, find locations that can rent, and build a system with the intention of we're gonna work hard to launch this thing in this location. But God may call us 2 years from now to a different location. We're going to try that in a different place. We can take that gear out and go somewhere else. If you can't do that when you lease a facility, when you rent a building, sign a 5-year lease, sign a 10-year lease. The reality of it is, if you plan on being portable from the front end, you can even approach this as like a test case. We're going to test this for the next 2 years, and which is a really unique opportunity and could be fit with the window that we find ourselves in. Hey, let's try that in this next 18 months, 2 years, see what the Lord has for us. And we had this in a series of the launches we did. We were talking about the fact that we were launching campuses we talked about we wanted a campus in every location, or a location, we call them regional sites, within 30 minutes of everybody in the what we called the Hamilton GTA corridor, which doesn't mean anything to you, but it's kind of like our region, like the region that we're in. Well, in the midst of all that launching, we had a whole bunch of people in this other community called Kitchener-Waterloo who kept coming to us and saying, hey, could you do something here? Could you do something here? And I was the guy that was like, well, we keep saying Hamilton GTA corridor. I'm not sure. I think God's only called us to here. And you know what we did? We stepped out and said, well, let's try something. And we did literally one service there. We called all the people, emailed all the people out there, and said, we're going to host one service and see what happens. Well, we had 200 people show up at that thing.
Nice.
And we were like, oh, well, I guess maybe we should try something. We stepped out and kind of changed what God was doing, what we thought God was doing, and launched a campus. Today, we ended up, there's 2 campuses out there, and they continue to reach. Appreciate Michael saying we need more nuts and bolts. We will get to some nuts and bolts, definitely. Yeah. Number 3, deploy those resources. So I was thinking about this week with executive pastors. So if you're a lead pastor today and you get together with other lead pastors, and you've never met them before, you say, hey, tell me about your church. Oftentimes what they'll say is like, oh, we have so many people in attendance. Oh, dude, Michael, you're going to want to pay attention, because we've got the actual process for you to walk through, which is amazing. So you're asking the right question.
It's on the agenda, buddy.
Yeah. It's that's so good, dude. And you say, like, how many people, if you're a lead pastor, how many people attend, how many services, that kind of thing. But when you get together with executive pastors, what they end up saying is, the question they'll always ask is, what's your saved resources for the total number of weeks in reserve that you have, financial reserve kind of thing. And the interesting thing that we've seen in the last number of years is this has grown in so many churches. I used to see 3 months in lots of churches. Today I bump into churches with lots of 6 months or more. I talked to a church recently that was over 6 months. And and regardless of what that number is, God's given you some resources to deploy, to actually make a difference, to reach people. And I would say this is a good season for you to be thinking about that. let's keep moving along. Trying to launch every 8 months. Very cool. I love that. Um, the number 4 reason why I think you should look at this is because your church will grow. I'd love to say I can guarantee this. It's as close to a guarantee as I can give you. And let me talk about the mechanics behind this. When you launch a new campus, what you're going to have to do is to find the greatest success factor of launching a new location is the size and health of the volunteer core. So the total number of people and the health of that group that will go and launch in this new location. Time and again, we see that 2/3 of the people that go and volunteer in that new location have never served with your church before. And what ends up happening is those 2/3 of people that have never volunteered before, if we can get them deployed between now and the fall, get them plugged in and serving, their life changes. That the amount of kind of vision casting you're going to do in their life to move them onto a team is going to make them a raving inviter. They're going to be the kind of person that wants to invite new people. And that invite will ultimately drive new growth at your church. And I talk about the 1 to 3 principle. For every 1 new volunteer that your church engages, you'll see a total of 3 people come to your church. So if you can deploy 100 new volunteers, that new campus will end up will grow by 300 net growth at your church. Now, there's a lot we can talk about there.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring this up is oftentimes when churches are at this point, they're making the decision between should we launch another service or should we launch another campus? And I would say pick the thing that takes more volunteers, not less volunteers, more volunteers, because the act of actually engaging more volunteers will ultimately drive new invites, will actually drive new people to come to the church. We can talk more about that. But when you launch a new new location, you'll end up driving new people to end up to volunteer, and that will ultimately drive more growth to your church. We've seen that time and again. Earlier, I talked about that 1,500 to 9,000. The reason why that you see that kind of growth, and that's over a bunch of years, is because we're constantly driving new people to come in. So Corey said, what is the ratio of volunteers to attendance you look for healthy indicator for launching? Great question. So I'd love to hear more, Corey, about where you're actually at. But we see the benchmark you should be looking at is 30% or 1 to 3 ratio. And if you're growing that, when you launch a new campus, you're going to grow that number larger than that. So if you're currently at about 30%, man, we're going to want to see as we add new volunteers, we're not just going to take our existing people. We're going to try to find a new group of volunteers to go launch in the new location, which naturally happens because you're going into somewhere distant from your current location. Usually within a half an hour to 45-minute window is the typical window we're trying to go for. We can come back to that, Corey, if you've got questions. The last number, 5 reason, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. So kind of coming back full circle. At the end of the day, friends, I think you want to be a part of a church that's taking faith steps. You want to be a kind of church that is stepping out and looking for new ways to take new ground. And launching a new campus this year would be a risky step, and that's okay. That's a part of what I think God has called you to. But it's not a risk in the sense of like, oh, it's like it's just like foolhardy. You can run the ramp of reason before you make the leap of faith. You can research what this looks like. We can help you. Barrett and the team's got like a launch time frame they can give you. PCI, they've done this with so many other people. Even if you're evaluating locations, I don't know that they'll do this. I've done this with locations with them. I'll take advantage of the fact they've seen lots of locations. Before I call them, I'll go and look at 3 or 4 locations. And then when I get on the phone, I'll be like, hey, let me tell you about the locations I'm looking at. Here's a bunch of photos. Which of these would you think would be better? Kind of leverage their intelligence around that.
We do that all the time. Yeah,
what's that?
absolutely.
You do that all the time?
We do that all the time. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. That's good. So I've dumped a bunch of information. Love to answer questions. Love to hear more. We're going to send you a resource after today. We've got this 3-part video series that dives into some of what we talked about today in more detail. So you'll see the link in the follow-up email to these 3. I'll just run through quickly. The number one is it's the biggest mistake that churches make when launching. So this is a short video, but frankly, I've just seen way too many churches make this mistake, and I don't want you to. The next is picking a great location for your next campus. So in that conversation, so I had a guy recently tell me, he said, this video, I'm on a chart and I draw some circles and show you some stuff. He's like, I think about this all the time when they're launching new locations, and we're just going to give it to you for free, which is great. And then ultimately, these 5 dirty secrets, you have to have something that like draws you in. These are the things that they don't tell you about multi-site that we wanted to tell you about. So those are there. I'm going to stop talking. I know we've got lots of other questions and stuff we want to get to.
Well, Rich, those are great resources, and I appreciate the way you came at it, and you were monitoring the questions. I appreciate the aggressiveness of the people that are attending and what they want to know. That reminded me, I would like to just tell you where we are going so that you can hang on and you'll get the nuts and bolts as you asked. So we realize that if you're going to launch in 150 days, PCI, we know what we do, and we're going to describe that process for you. Barrett is going to outline the time frames and what happens during that time frame. But we're only half the equation. The other half is you, and what are you involved in? So we've designed this red, yellow, green light assessment that you can go to, and I will include that in the resources as well, that will kind of go over 10 to 12 areas of your church you need to assess to see if internally you are ready or not to launch. And that assessment tool will help you, and it will also help guide us in our conversations with you if you just decide to go portable. And again, these resources will all come to anyone that is registered already for the webinar today. So I just kind of want to get to some of the nuts and bolts. I'd like some of the internal things that you will want to be thinking about, or the questions that your church, in order to launch in 150 days or so, you'll want to be thinking about is the questions of why would we do this? If this is your first campus, that's a great question. Why would we do this? And what are the alternatives to launching campuses? Or do we have a motivating vision? Do we have a visionary that's going to lead us? Because that's really a key for the gas in the tank. Fund development. Do we have enough funds to be able to launch a campus in 150 days? What does it take to launch a campus in 150 days? Do we have enough leadership? Do we want to plant, or do we want to multi-site? All of those kind of questions, and there's probably another half a dozen more that you can assess yourself and say, it looks like I've got a yellow or green light. And then you could talk to Barrett or Jesse or myself or even Rich and talk about those things in particular to say, how do I shore up a yellow light into becoming a green light for us so that we can go, go, go. One of the pieces of the church, as I travel around the country and I talk to a lot of churches, one of the pieces that leaders tend to forget is that it is important to be a wooing church. It is important to preach the gospel and bring them into the word, but it's as important to send, to be a sending church. And you do that on Sundays, when you're done with the message, there's a charge and there's a sending people back into their communities. And it's really important that they sense we are a sending church. And sometimes you do that as individuals, and sometimes you do that corporately as a group going into a new community to start a new work for your church. The next thing that we want to talk about, and then we'll get to the timeline and the process that PCI takes you through, is the options that you have. As a growing church, you do have options. The last option that I'll give you is kind of smart alecky, but it kind of is necessary to say. So the first option is to what we have called stacking services, where we typically like to tell churches, even if they're going portable, try to start with 2 services, because then you have always in place that serve one and attend one option for all of your volunteers. So that's the very basic stacking services, but there's pros and cons to that. And there's high demand on facilities and people that we could help walk you through some of those questions. But there are 5 bonus benefits that I'm not sure all church leaders think through when they're considering whether what they're going to launch in. There are, to my knowledge, there are only 5 ways that you can put a new presence of your church into a new community. There's only 5. I challenged in 4 or 5 years as I've traveled around, I challenged people to say, tell me other options, and they really can't. So the 5 options are to find a green piece of grass and to build your own church on that green piece of grass. And I will just say real quickly on each of these 1 or 2 things. Buying a piece of grass right now can be expensive depending on the market you're in. And it is slow raising the money for that and to build it out. The second 2, number 2 and number 3, are buying a commercial big box store or a similar strip shopping center store is a real option. Buying it or leasing it are the next 2 options. And that really kind of depends on your level of expertise of managing a lease or a purchase and what would be most advantageous. I am a fan of leasing for a while, at least until your next, whatever your next facility is going to be. And I'd be glad to get on the phone and talk to you about why I like the lease option for commercial lease option. The next option is a newer option to the church. We are seeing, especially since the pandemic, a huge influx of mergers. The pandemic, COVID, accelerated a lot of things. It accelerated health in a church, and it also accelerated the slow decline of churches. And there are churches that are merging, and I love the idea of merge. I love the idea of redemption that it has, and that a merger allows buildings and property and all those physical things to stay within the church instead of selling buildings off for offices and that kind of stuff. And the last option is portability, and that is us. And we are smart enough to realize that that it is much more comfortable to be in a built-out environment that is yours 24/7. However, it's expensive. And so we understand, and we actually try to guide you through the portability process, that within 3 to 5 years, you could be in that next if you choose to be in that next. And by next, I mean a commercial property, a new property, or even a merger. But portability leverages you into a new community. And I have 10 or 12 reasons. Portability you can use it as a leveraging tool, but I'm just going to share 5. Portability, of all those things I mentioned, portability is the cheapest way for you to get into a new community with a sense of professionalism, the way Portable Church does it. So it's the least expensive way to do that. You can go in relatively inexpensively with regard to a debt. You don't have to incur debt to go in portable. And one of the neat things about going in portable is that you can begin garnering attendance and tithing for that location and that location's next facility, whatever that is. And it's the fastest way. Like I said, Portable Church has the capacity to get you into a new facility up and operating in a very professional manner where newcomers to the church will feel very comfortable in less than 150 days. And we'd love to help you with that. The last of the best benefits for launching portable is that when you go portable, you become an insider to that community. And as an insider, you're afforded a lot of opportunities that outsiders are not afforded. So as an insider, you can go and get the necessary permits you can get the zoning, you're talking to friends in most of the civic organizations, and they are guiding you as an insider on how to get that next and how to grow, and you have a place of ministry while you're doing that. So those are just 5 easy benefits to going portable and then thinking through what your long-term strategy might be. So that would involve some of the nuts and bolts. The rest of the nuts and bolts I'm going to leave to Barrett. Barrett is a launch specialist, and he does that with great care, and he has an amazing love for the church. So he's a pastor, or he was a pastor, and he still has his pastor heart, and it's on loan to PCI through Barrett, and we love that. So Barrett, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the timeline and the process that would be involved in launching in 150 days. So do you really think we can do that? Launch?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What people just don't know, and they would have no reason to know, is that we do that all the time. It's not uncommon for us. It sounds crazy elsewhere, and it is fast, like no doubt. And you know, Rich highlighted a lot of the things that we want to be certain of, right? We don't want to multiply out things that are unhealthy, right? We don't want to, you know, in unhealth, when we multiply, you know, you reproduce the things that maybe need some work, or some things that are not going to benefit folks the most as we point them, you know, to Jesus, or in a growing discipleship relationship with Jesus. And so we want to make sure we have those things taken care of, and that's the assessment, right? That Jeff pointed to. It's a great tool. I was on staff at a multi-site, a couple multi-sites here in Metro Detroit, where I live for many years, and now for the first time I'm a part of a church plant, a growing church plant. It's awesome. I was talking to Rich and getting excited about it this week. But it's fun to wear that hat, and to think about the nitty-gritty of what's next for us. And so it's services for us. It's another location, hopefully at some point. But yeah, this stuff's exciting. So we do that all the time. In terms of timeline, actually, Michael, I would love to talk with you about 8 months, just since you've put your hand up and said, you know, that's what you're doing. You know, but a timeline for us, if we were to hypothetically think of, you know, what that looks like starting in, you know, we're in mid-May. Let's start a month from now. Yep, because conversations kind of start. We have initial conversations where we get to learn each other, hear about you guys and what you're up to. And you know, because of Rich's inspiration, what God's doing in your church, whatever it is, you're decided, okay, you know, we're not going to be risk averse, right? We are going to proceed with how God's called us. Great, let's talk. And we're assuming that you're going to go forward with the campus, and portability is one option that you're looking at. Obviously, for the reasons Jeff shared, can be a great option. But there are a lot of options. I shared this week at the conference that Rich mentioned, with a number of pastors. People think because we're portable church that we want all of our churches to be portable in every expression forever. And that's just not the case. And that's not what's best for you or your church. And so we're not proponents of that. That's why Jeff talks about all the different options that are available. But you're proceeding. Portability is an option. You've got some venues, and we can talk about that. We can survey venues with you, even pre meeting you or meeting with you. We can actually, in some instances, we have actually looked at separate locations, different options on site in your city when you're deciding between a couple. Like Rich mentioned, we've seen lots of venues. He's seen lots of venues. And there are some things, and we have some resources I'm happy to send even in advance of that. But there are some things that are red flags where we'd say, oh, you know, for this reason, we might recommend you look at this location. But I keep kind of hinting at it. Our process starts with a consultation. You know, like everybody else, we got flexible with that in COVID, doing things virtually like this, and really drilling down on how can we do what we do better, and in more flexible ways. But now that we are kind of back to as we were, our preference is still to meet you, to meet your teams, in person, see your current facilities, see the new venues, and walk those both with you to get a picture of who you are. Because regardless of where you launch, whether it's a brick and mortar campus, whether you're buying a church building, a huge piece of what you're doing as you campus is transferring culture and DNA, right? That is what makes this whole thing different than just going out as a church plant, right? You're setting expectation as a church planter. You are, for lack of a better term, you are transferring brand and culture to another location. But for your people that call your church home, there are reasons they love that place. And there are reasons that they love that place enough that they will go to another location to be the crazy early adopters to say, yes, I'll do that thing. And if we don't nail culture and DNA, again, regardless of whether it's portable or not, 6 months is the honeymoon phase. And I'm sure Rich and Jeff can both tell you stories of when it's done poorly or maybe not at the same level, campus to campus, even different expressions where we see this trickle back, especially if your campus is close. I see trickle back effect. So we start with a consultation. Let's say that happens in mid-June. Usually that's a 3-day process where we go from meeting with central staff. There's usually 3 things we try and do on day 1 of that consult. We are meeting with central staff, so we want to hear about kids. We want to hear about tech. We want to hear about production and see what that looks like for you guys in a Sunday morning. So we want to meet. The second thing we want to do is see your what we call broadcast location. We try not to call it main campus because sometimes newer campuses are actually the better ones for us to see. If you've got multiple campuses that were built newer, sometimes that's a better, more current expression of who you are and will want to multiply into. So we want to see current facility. The third thing we want to do is walk the new facility, right? We want to take measurements. We want to look at entrance and exits. Where's the kids' space going to be? Where have you thought about putting the main auditorium? And again, in those situations, we are, working that back and forth with you to think about, okay, what are the limitations here? What are the great things about this building? And then from there, we're actually going to put together a design over the next 2 days so that by the time we leave town in that 3-day process, we're presenting you with a design that based on what we saw, what we heard, and the budget that we'll talk about, because it's different for every single one of you, I guarantee. Here's a design that we would suggest from what we saw, what we heard, and that budget that we would suggest would be great for this campus launch. From there, our consultants, and I go with our consultants at times. It really just depends on needs of your church. From there, we'll come back home and we are in the nuts and bolts of revisions, right? So, sometimes we slam dunk it, but a lot of times we massage it. We need to see options. We need to see, what things look like, and massage that a little bit.
And the
So
staff,
from there, so good.
well, I was just gonna say, and the local staff will feed into that. Once they see the whole thing, they'll say, oh, we forgot to tell you about this. Or,
Right.
nah, I don't think we need that.
Right. So not uncommon at all. So eventually we'll do on the quick end, like if you're, and every church is different. I'm sure you guys can resonate with this. Some churches are able to make decisions quickly. And that's great.
Yeah.
And some churches, based on leadership structure, that's not a quick process, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna
But-
watch.
You want?
I'm gonna Zoom call.
Oh, then go ahead.
Oh, yeah, we'll keep rolling. So on 2 weeks, let's say we come home, we're doing those revisions. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, right? We have a week of revisions with you and your central staff. We put it into review, which we can talk about later, but we fully review every system. So we cross all our T's, dot all our I's. It's a huge part of our process. Then what we'll do is you'll look at me and say, hey, Barrett, that looks like us. The revisions are great. We put it into production, hit the green light. So that puts us, if, like I said, just hypothetically, we're starting in June. That would be any of you guys who are kind of thinking about this. We have consult in June. We take 2 weeks. So by maybe the 4th of July, if we can move quickly, mid-July, if we need a little more time to make those decisions, we're into production. Then depending on the size of the system, from there, once we're what we call in production, your system is in production. It's usually 10 to 12 weeks where we would see you. Again, sometimes larger systems, for our largest multi-sites, those take a little bit longer. Our smaller ones, our more rural multi-site friends, that can be a little shorter. but generally based on the, the technology, trailers, things that are in all of our systems, typically, our timeline that we're comfortable with is usually about 10 to 12 weeks. So that puts us a launch, somewhere September, October of this year. So completely feasible in 150 days. Not even outstripping ourselves. So I don't have any hair. That's why I wear a hat all the time. I look like Rich. His head just must not get as cold as mine does. I'm just freezing all the time. But, that's a new campus in 150 days, but that's not even us running around with our hair on fire. That is just moving, with purpose through the process and making sure we're in lockstep and attentive to each other's questions, needs, concerns, and it's not uncommon and completely doable. So would love to talk with you guys. Completely doable.
I have another question for you.
Yeah,
So,
yes, sir.
Our feedback from the churches that we do consults with, the two most exciting things for them is the consult itself, because there is so much information shared and so many ideas shared that it's an exciting environment. And the other end, can you describe the delivery weekend? Because a ton of churches just love that weekend.
For sure. Yeah. So at the end of the process, so we've done all the design, we've done the production, and Rich has been a part of these weekends too. At the very end, before launch, so not your launch weekend, that is highly recommended against. But prior to your launch weekend, we send a team. Most typically, it's 2 of us. So somebody like myself, who you don't want touching any technology, right? So I'm not in the auditorium. I'm in what we call kids and community side. And I'm with all the volunteers that are doing parking and kids and first impressions, guest experience, whatever your church calls it, signage, all that kind of stuff. And then somebody else who's walking through the auditorium, lights, video, audio, all that kind of stuff. And basically we do a 2-day training. It's a 2-day experience where on Saturday, day 1, we are going in discipleship language. It's very much like we do, you watch. And so it's slower, it's more methodical. It's lots of asking questions. And it takes a long time. So it actually is fun because a lot of times volunteers will say, man, how are we going to do this week to week? And it's actually good. I tell pastors that all the time. It freaks them out, but I tell them that's a great thing. So that the next day, we come back on Sunday, usually, and do the same thing. And instead of we do, you watch, it's you do, and we help. So we're there as the chief encouragers. We're high-fiving, we're reminding about the things we did on Saturday, but it really is celebratory because all of the doubt and apprehension for people, volunteers, right? They're just going to your church that have never done this before. On Sunday, we get to see them say things like, man, we can do this. Like, I'm encouraged. We set up 10 times faster than we did yesterday. We can do this. We're ready for this. And so it tends to, those weekends are a blast for me. Especially if, as a guy who's pastor for a long time, is pastoring still, like they usually end in high fives and hugs, right? Because there's so much excitement. There's so much encouragement,
It's
and
a
there's a
celebration.
feeling of like, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, good question, Jeff.
A couple of things we've got plenty of time for Q&A, and Jesse's going to come up in a minute, and we'll have some Q&A. But I want a couple of fine points I wanted to bring in, and Rich, you're welcome to jump into this. You've done this as long as we have, or maybe even longer. When our consultants come on campus, they're designing for street to seat. So they are trying to think through your environment to bring as much of the DNA and culture of your sending campus as possible. And when it means street to seat, it's really important that every step along the way is done correctly and in accordance with who the church is and what the vision that they're trying to cast for the unsaved person. So our designers are trained to walk through it as an unsaved person. And for me, it's especially important when they come to the kids space. Our designers design for security first, and then it's done in a professional environment so that when parents drop their kids off, their mind isn't left there but they have confidence that what they see and what they hear is going to protect their kids and be good to their kids. So then their body and their mind both walk into worship and are able to hear the gospel. And that's really what it's all about. And then when we get to the auditorium, another thought that typically comes up is we get to work with a lot of technical teams and production teams, and they are the drivers because we want to give you your church in that location. They drive the experience for us. We don't put anything down their throats or anything else. They're a partner, truly a partner with us. We just put it into a portable experience. Anything else, Barrett, Rich, Jesse?
Well, the detail plan you guys provide, I think, is so crazy. Like, it's amazing. Like, you see the spaces better than we do because you see them all the time. And even like something as simple as like, I remember, like getting questions even around like, well, like you'll count how many parking spots there are, and it's like that's not even something I've thought of. I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't. But you're right. I've been thinking about how many seats are in the main auditorium, how many kids, that kind of thing. And so I think the advantage of an outside consultant like from you guys to help with that is you're seeing things that we just take for granted because we're just too much in the weeds in it. But
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing I love about that whole design process.
yeah.
No,
Jesse? Oh, go ahead, Barrett.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a good picture, but obviously there's a lot that could be shared additionally. Happy to field questions if anybody has them for us. Would love to expound on anything that wasn't clear or just anything that might be more specific to where you're at and what your needs are.
Jesse, what do you got?
I've actually got a question for Rich. So, Rich, you've been doing this a long time. You mentioned kind of the arc of your career through the multi-site world. Michael had asked earlier, talking about nuts and bolts. What are your top 5, best practices that you want to incorporate or suggest people incorporate into their plan as they're putting together that multi-site strategy?
Yeah, I don't think you can overstate the fact that the success, and I said it already, but the success of the campus rides on the size and health of the volunteer core. And you really have to build your launch plan backwards from that and think really carefully about the location you're going into that you've got. And we cover it in one of those videos, but like the location you're going into, ensure that you've got a ton of people or a number of people already there that you're trying to, hive off to go and launch the new thing. Even something as simple as, and I know this is like, listen, I don't work for PCI. I love PCI. But one of the things about PCI that's great is their systems are volunteer friendly, well, they're more than volunteer friendly. They're like volunteer positive. And thinking about the experience from like, how do we set up and tear down in a way that isn't going to have your, your volunteer teams, begrudging it all these years later. I attend a portable campus. We meet in a movie theater. It was a PCI system. And I think I can't even remember. I think it was 2007 we launched, and we're still rolling the same cases and the same, that same group of volunteers. And those people are not burnt out. In fact, that campus all these years later is moving into a new location. And there is, and it's like a permanent location. And there's been a minor revolt from that team saying, like, hey, we, love this setup teardown thing, which you would not think, right? You would not think after however many years that is, that, people would want to continue to do that. So you've got to think backwards from the volunteer piece, particularly. What do we do to maximize that? Obviously, a part of what we're talking about today is the actual PCI system, but there's a lot of more pieces around that. That's like the number one thing, but there's a ton of trickle down from that. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you so much. You mentioned a couple things. Jeff, as he was talking about, facilities and planning for a facility, what do you see as kind of the best facilities for people to be looking for in their community when they're getting ready to do their multi-site?
Is that for Rich or Barrett? Go ahead, Barrett.
That's for you,
Yeah.
Jeff.
Oh, for
I'm
me?
gonna take it anyway.
Go ahead, Barrett.
Yeah, it was a conversation that was coming up a lot this week. So I got to hang out this week.
Yeah.
like we keep mentioning, it's top of mind, and I think it was very pertinent. We were talking to a lot of churches that are, we were marveling yesterday afternoon at just how much positivity and exciting things there are going on. From fundraising campaigns to new campuses to the baptisms that Rich mentioned. There's just a lot of good and excitement. But we were talking specifically about, campusing, because we were with executive pastors, and they were asking that exact question, Jesse, a lot of times. And what I shared with them is, my favorite these days is still, after all these years, is still high schools. It is de facto in this post-Christian world, post-Christian, right? Almost, that it is kind of the center of religiosity. Like, it is just this shrine in the middle of the community that everybody still centers around, right? It was like when the eclipse was happening. Like, it didn't matter what you were doing, like everybody was freaking out about it. It was kind of this unifying thing. It's still the same what we see with schools. But high schools I like better than elementary schools, middle schools, just because of the parking that Rich mentioned. Their seats, the building's made for larger people. So like, I can sit in those seats. You can sit in those seats. We're not elementary school where we're trying to squeeze our bottoms into these tiny little elementary school seats, right? There's enough space for adults. And they're really the center of those communities. So it's easy to tell people where you are at. I know Rich's church is in a movie theater. That's great. For multi-sites, you got to be a little more creative there. I mean, they'll tell you, like, you're going to need more theaters as you grow. There's a hard out time that usually happens at noon, because they've got to start making money, right? They've got to start showing films. But we've seen, man, there's such a diversity of places you can look with. And I'm happy to send resources there, because we've seen, I mean, Jesse can corroborate, Jeff. We've done bowling alleys, and somebody did a funeral home, train depots. Like, it's wild when you get creative. Portability is inherently flexible, and so there's lots of options there. My favorite's still the high school.
Another exciting venue is the YMCA. A lot of YMCA's are really nice. They're available. They have all of the amenities that a portable church needs. And YMCA's right now are wanting to partner with the church, which is unusual. One additional thing before we begin to close off here about schools, we really coach that we would love to see churches not just rent the school, but to engage with the school. As a part of the church, all of the teachers, the administration, and the students and the families represent that community. And we love it when we see churches engaging specifically with the schools. It can be so easy. Jesse, any last questions before we sign?
So I've got a couple more here before I let everybody go.
Okay.
Barrett, what questions should they be asking when they call you? What things should they be thinking about?
Yeah, you should definitely be thinking about, timeline with us, 150 days, that's great. You're ready for that. Is there resolve around, like, if you're a multi-site, does your executive team, your elder board, however your governance is, like, are you guys all of same mind? Be asking that. And when I think about that, I mean, yes, are we ready to do this? But also, are we ready to do all the things that it takes to do this? Like, are we on the same page about what we're willing to spend, who we're willing to hire, what this means for our structures as a church? Like, when are we going to decide on things that get us really in the weeds and take away from culture, right? Like, decision rights and things like that. It has to be a concerted effort. It can't just be, God love them. I mean, I have such a heart for XPs and operations pastors. Love it. Could talk to you folks all day. But there has to be really resolve and unity across the board. So making sure to ask, are we on the same page? And when we say that, when you say same page and I say same page, is that actually the same thing? Because that's so necessary and will save so much headache. I think the other thing to be asked, and the assessment that Jeff mentioned, I would encourage all of you to take if you haven't seen it.
And we'll send the link.
Yeah, the biggest thing would be why, right? There are so many good reasons to do it, and Rich highlighted so many of those. But why are you doing it? Why is this a call that you have? Because I think based on that, it really frames what the wins are here and how you're going to approach campusing.
Awesome. That's great. Hey, Rich, you jumped into the chat real quick and threw out movie theaters. Can you speak into some of the positives and some of the challenges that are presented by movie theaters?
Yeah, shout out to Drake, by the way. I like Drake. He's a good guy. Just notice he's here. So movie theaters. So I would say I have like a little bit of a love-hate relationship with movie theaters, if I'm honest. This is not a Regal phone call, so I'm fine to speak
Yeah.
freely. I'm just kidding. They're great. So I've done a lot of campuses in movie theaters, and
I know you have, absolutely.
they're good. The thing I like about them rather than schools, so compare and contrast, the thing about movie theaters is it's really clear what they're motivated by, which is just money. Like they're trying to figure out how to make them, they're trying to maximize that part of the morning, which is good.
Right.
Sometimes in schools, it's like it's a little unclear the motivation. Like it's like partly money, but it's also like how much hassle is it for the janitor? Like there's a bit more nuanced kind of conversation going on there.
Right.
So that's a positive thing. Like it's real clear what they're looking for, which is a good thing. They're great for like the main room. The rooms are incredibly acoustically, they're amazing. Like most of them, if they're anything built after, well, probably 2000, so anything the last 25 years, they're like acoustically neutral rooms. So they're beautiful rooms to build sound systems for. They're great on that front, as opposed to like you can get into a school and it's like echoey and all that. You can wrestle with that a bit more.
Right.
They're really good for the main auditorium, really good for elementary age school kids, because kids love to go to the movie theater. It is fun in that, sometimes if you say high schools, not so much, but middle schools, like if you said, hey, we're meeting at George Washington Middle School, people may not know where that is. But if you say we're meeting at XYZ Regal Theaters, they'll know exactly where that is. Everybody in town knows where the movie theater is, which is super important. And they've spent a ton of money on figuring out where is the best location to be. They usually have tons of parking, an ocean of parking, which is good. The downside is really is the preschool space. Like it actually leans in well with Portable Church. If you're thinking about a movie theater, like go for it. But press the PCI guys around how do you do preschool space well? Because if you think about it, the impression of a movie theater is like sticky floors, not great. And then preschool is like kids crawling on the ground, all of that. And they've got lots of solutions to overcome that. But you're going to want to actually think about that space a little bit more. You can do it. It's fine. Like I say, we have done it in, well, I don't know, like a dozen locations. Well, maybe not a dozen, 10 locations. We've done a lot of movie theaters. But there's just a few things to think about, but it's really that preschool space is the hardest piece of the puzzle.
No, it totally makes sense. From a community building standpoint, you mentioned something I think that's really helpful too. Like you mentioned, anything that's built within the last 20-ish years, most of those have a lot of restaurants that are built up around them because the theaters invested a ton of time into the demographics of understanding where to drop one of those. You've got restaurants built up. I mean, so what we have heard is that people can literally, without leaving the parking lot, they literally just walk from the theater to the restaurant and build community, right? That's, hey, you guys want to go lunch? Now it's not debating for 20 minutes as to where you're going to go on the other side of town. It's, hey, you guys want to go over there?
That's very good. There is something too, like kind of related to that, Jesse, that's a positive in movie theaters is, and I don't know how to say this nicely, like not everyone has positive feelings about their high school. Like not everyone is like, that was the best part of my life. But people generally have positive feelings about the movies. It's like, hey, that's a fun place to go. There is, I've joked in other contexts, there's a tangible intangibility. Like there is actually something to the like, oh, that's a fun place to go. I do like those. I think looking at movie theaters is good. I think they are good spaces.
I also love, one of my favorite things about a movie theater is that they, it's I think the easiest venue to tell people where you meet.
Yes.
Yes.
100%.
That's an issue. That's a real issue for sure.
And it's really helpful to
Sweet.
get them back the
Right.
second time. If you can
Yeah.
get the staff to pop their popcorn while you're in church.
I've heard that before. Absolutely. We've got churches that will do that. They'll come back and they're like, hey, we came up with this really cool trick. We've actually hired one of the high school kids to come in on Sunday mornings and fire up the popcorn machine. And then people will come because they're curious about a church that serves popcorn during Sunday morning. I mean, it's little things like that that can really make the difference, right?
The At the Movies series, 100% of the time.
There you go. Absolutely.
What else you got there, Jesse?
Jeff, I've actually got one for you. As people are looking more, I know we've been talking 150 days. If we've got some folks that are on here that are kind of not within the 150-day window, what are a couple of things that you would encourage them to think about more of the long-term strategy side?
Well, I mean, 150 days is aggressive. It's our typical time frame in what we do, so it's not stressful for us, but it can be stressful for a church and a church leader to make the decisions and to get everything in line so that they can be successful. So I would certainly take the assessment. I provide a link here, and I'll provide a link as a follow-up, but take the assessment, and what that broadly does is gives you about 10 or 12 areas that you'll want to make sure are healthy in order for you to launch well. And then I'll also provide phone numbers and Calendly for Barrett and I and Jesse, that we can talk with you about some of the concerns that you have and walk you through each of the spaces. What does fundraising look like? How much does a system cost? And what are the parameters around the cost of a system? And I'm going to address that in just a second. What kind of leadership is involved? Do we need to be video, or can it be live preaching? And all of those issues you kind of need to sort out. And some churches take longer to make decisions and need a longer runway, and that's okay. What Barrett gave you was a relevant time frame from June until October. What it looks like for us and what it can look like for you. So we could talk you through any time frame. My typical time frame for working with a church, I might engage with a church that's just getting a vision for planting or launching new sites, and we could talk up to 3 years. But there are a lot of churches that are we would really love to have 5 campuses in the next 3 years. Well, that's pretty aggressive. But we can do that, and we've helped churches figure out how to do that and what the processes are involved. With regard to the only thing we haven't talked about on this webinar is cost. And all I would say about cost, and we can talk to you again on the phone about this, but cost is relative to how you do church. If you are a highly technical and highly production-driven church, you know how expensive screens and projectors and sound equipment and video switchers and cameras and all of that stuff is. We found that about 57% of the expense of a portable system is involved in the technology, both in the worship space and the children's space, what you're trying to do. So we'd be glad to talk to you about that. But if you're a Cadillac church and you do everything to the nines, chances are you're going to want a Cadillac portability system. If you are wonderful in an Oldsmobile, my grandpa, and me, you will want an Oldsmobile type system. And then we also have, I guess I don't want to name any brand.
Well, hold on. Here's what I'll say. We can do the Ford Focus and we can do the Ferrari. It all depends on what you need. They both have wheels, steering wheels, and seats, and get you where you want to go. Just one of them does them a little differently than the other.
Right.
Let's take one more question here. We've got one from, I think it's I. Bailey. Says, I'm a DJ looking to launch at my church at a local club in the area. Do you have a solution to accommodate this type of location? Real quick, let's, if we can, Barrett and Rich, this is for you guys. What are a couple things that he needs to be thinking about as he looks at a club specifically, or an unusual place that isn't a school, it's not a movie theater, it's not a community center, something like a club or a restaurant or something like that?
I think in every location, I think that's great. I've known a number of churches that have done, nightclub locations. The great thing is they're not being used as a nightclub on Sunday morning, which is fantastic. And there's a great there's a great crossover there. My general advice about locations are you have to understand the leadership structure of the organization that you're renting from. And there are typically, in broad strokes, there's like the owner or like the big chief person, and then there's the person that's actually going to, like the janitor or the person that's going to open the
Yeah, the
doors.
club manager.
And yeah, the club manager. And you've got, those are two different kinds of relationships, and they have two different needs.
Right.
So we would go out of our way, like when we would, this is in a school, but when we launch in schools, man, we'll do like big like rib dinner thing for the janitor team. We're like, when's your like August, everybody's back, can we bring like a huge dinner for you guys? We'll like replace tools for them, all that kind of stuff, because we're trying to win their favor, right? We want them to like us, right? They're like, oh, those are the guys that bring us ribs every August. Like that stuff works, like whether you like it or not, that
Sure.
stuff works. And then on the, you want to understand with the owner of the club or whoever that person is, what are they looking for? Obviously, there's a financial thing, but you want to get to know them. You want to find out what their motivations are, because there will be whatever you put in the contract. And then there's always going to be some sort of massage thing 6 months from now. You might want to do something that's slightly outside the contract, and you want to make sure you have a good relationship with both of those people to make that work, if that's helpful.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely.
And then from the logistical side, like I mentioned earlier, portability is inherently flexible, right? So there's no need to be scary about creative locations or venue options. You just have to be ready to get creative then with the solutions you have to the unique situations that will present. For example, right? A club in an urban dense environment, it's like, how are people getting there? If they're taking public transport, awesome. You need to account for that. People are paying for that. They're going to be coming from multiple places. If you're asking people to come in and park there, right? Again, not insurmountable. Just want to have concessions there. There will be similar things inside. I'm working with a church in Brooklyn right now that's we're doing a kids system for them in a club. So it's a weird building. It's a weird space. It's in the bar. And we're covering things up and kind of like what Rich was saying with the movie theater. Like, we want to make sure that little Johnny's not, on all fours on the skeezy floor, because that's gross, right?
Right.
No mom wants that. And so, yeah, those are things to think about. But again, as long as and that's really what we get to help with, right? We see these situations all the time. So our goal and hope would be to guide us through those questions that you have no reason to have thought about yet, because you're thinking about 1,000 other things, and you're building your teams, and you're strategizing on the whys and the hows. You're going to mobilize people to do this, and we really would love to take the burden of the logistics and those concessions off your plate. So yeah, DJ in a club, awesome. Let's do it.
It's an amazing, some of the places that we've put portable churches, and they have thrived.
For the record, we've actually got some photos of that stuff too, some before and afters that we can connect with. So we'll, feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk through that with you as well. One last one, Rich, I saw you were kind of jumping in here with Drake, answering his question. Do you want to speak into that for everybody for a second? And then that will literally be the last one.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a little more detail. I don't know if Drake could jump on or something. Just what the question is like. So yeah, they're relaunching a new campus. Like, to me, relaunch says I would leverage this to try to radically grow the volunteer core. So I would go back and do all of the stuff in my launch process. We talk about house parties and recasting vision, and I would redo all of that to try to expand the total number of people who are in on the team. That would be that's where my brain went, but I don't know if that's helpful. Or you're thinking like you're looking for a new location. I wasn't sure.
So while we're waiting on that, I would just tell those that are listening.
Jeff, he did. Hold on, he responded real quick. He said, "Yep, that's where my headspace is. Has been at chatting with our campus pastor too, relaunch team. was our main focus. So there you go. Well done.
What I was going to say is, the three of us, Barrett, Jesse, and I, we have worked with PCI, and we can walk a church through any time frame for your church to get portable, and even talk you through what really is the best option for you. Rich has a ton of experience and coaches churches on the other side, on the church side of getting healthy and getting ready and building up that volunteer base. So I know he's available to do some of that sometimes as well. Rick, I hope I didn't put you in a bad place there, but I know that
Too
I'm
late.
happy to chat. Yeah, I dropped my email in there. Happy to chat with anybody if there's any. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. Well, and for the record, I hate to say this part out loud, but I think there's 30 years of experience between myself, Jeff, and Barrett, and then a fair amount. I won't speak for Rich, but a lot of experience there as well.
Yeah, a number of years.
but you notice some of us still have our hair.
Well, I was going to say, Rich, you and I started talking, I think, when I first got here 16 years ago. We'll just leave that there.
Yeah, it's true. It's been a
All
while.
right. Well, I appreciate everybody that joined us today, and I hope that somehow we sparked some thoughts, some ideas, some curiosity, and just we want you to know that we are available here to talk. We'll leave some contact information there for you to connect with us, and we've got a lot of resources. So the resource page is probably going to be long that I send out. And I appreciate Barrett and Jesse and Rich and Jeremiah behind the scenes and all the things that were necessary to get this going. So God bless you, and have a great day. We look forward to building the kingdom step by step.